Greetings, Culture Warriors. This is Jeff Vieira, author of Culture is Everything, and the host of this Dispatch from the Front podcast. Today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. So usually I take an article and provide analysis from a cultural lens, but today I want to talk to you about a different aspect of culture, hiring and firing. So in the book, one of the points we make in terms of reforming your culture, transforming your culture, is that you need to reinforce your culture through your hiring and firing practices. What we mean by that is that when it comes to firing, if someone is making their number, but they're doing so in a way which is not consistent with the cultural values of the company, you need to let them go. You need to let them go because business is a team sport, and one person making their number while detracting from others' ability to make their numbers, which is what culture is all about, is just not going to work. It's a net loss. You know, back in the day, I was working for a Fortune 100 company, very well regarded, and I made the decision to leave that company after having a conversation with my manager, who I really respected. And he was just venting a little bit about how difficult being a manager could be sometimes. And he was saying, boy, it's easy when you got someone who makes their numbers and they do it the right way. You just promote them. Easy. If someone doesn't make their numbers and they do things the wrong way, you get rid of them. If somebody does things the right way, but they can't make their number, well, you coach them. But the hardest thing is, what do you do with somebody who makes their number, but they're terrible to work with? And for me, even at that early point in my career, that was not a hard decision to make at all. You get rid of them. You get rid of them because it's not about one person. It's about their impact on the team and the organization. And if you've got someone who is terrible in the locker room, and boy, haven't folks who have in the NFL who have had Antonio Brown on their roster, haven't they lived this? If you've got someone who's awful in the locker room, they take away from the team. Getting rid of them is what we call addition by subtraction. Because now the rest of the team has a better chance to cohere and to perform better. And of course, in business, since there are very few, at least once you reach a certain scale, there are a few businesses which are one person deep and dependent utterly on the performance of that one person. In those situations, culture is king. Culture is everything. And so in the book, likewise, when it comes to hiring, I recommend you hire for culture fit. Not for experience, not for perceived aptitude, not for the job role that somebody wrote back in 1976 and you just dust off every time Microsoft Office comes up with a new version, but for culture fit. Somebody who can work well on the team, fits in, and will help you move forward. Let's look back to when the business was a startup, right? Even mighty companies like Amazon. Amazon famously started, with Jeff Bezos in a tiny little office, and his wife, or his ex-wife, I should say, helping him mail out packages of books. Very tiny operation. Now, Jeff Bezos probably did not have in his pedigree mail order clerk before taking on that task, nor I'm sure did his ex-wife. But they did it because they had the right attitude of starting that business and growing it, scaling it. And I'm sure as the business grew and as they took on other early employees, it was much the same. I would be willing to bet that the person who started out their career answering the phones at Amazon did not wind up their career answering the phone. So were you looking for the best possible person to answer the phone, or were you looking for somebody who could be a partner and grow as the company grew? I would argue that that's the same regardless of whether the company itself is in a startup environment, because we all know that over time, the situation in the company changes. The situation in the marketplace changes. The company itself changes. Bank of America, where I worked for 10 years, started out as a small, scrappy North Carolina bank. It grew vastly over the next 20, 25 years. They acquired other companies. They got into other businesses than what their initial portfolio was. And yet you'll see that many of the top leaders at Bank of America were people who came up either through that small North Carolina bank or through one of the companies that eventually acquired. But they came up through the ranks there. They grew and grew as the bank grew and grew. And what they recognized was that it was not so much that they had a given set of experience. Say you're talking about credit cards. They didn't necessarily have the most credit card experience in the world, but what they had was they were steeped in the culture of the bank. That culture did evolve over time. When you merge with companies like Fleet, like Merrill Lynch, like Countrywide Mortgage, those are fairly large entities. They have cultures of their own. In some cases, they're strong cultures. And as you bring them together, your overall company culture is going to change a bit. But they felt it was important to have people that were kind of steeped in that culture, even if their experience wasn't perfectly aligned with what the job role called for at that particular point in time. And Bank of America was notorious for folks changing jobs frequently. I don't think there was a stint at Bank of America where I was in one role for more than 6 months. It changed that frequently. Now, the work didn't change quite as much, but the organizational structure, the alignment, the reporting, that changed very frequently. So when you're going out and looking for someone to bring on the team, and you're in an environment where you know that while I may have an opening for mailroom clerk today, that likely over the course of time, I'm going to need something very different, then how much sense does it make to set up your process around job descriptions? Number one, the internal thing in most companies is that job descriptions are a joke. When I was a hiring manager, we were always asked to provide a job description in HR so that they knew what to look for. And in my opinion, it was almost always a complete and utter waste of time, because the sort of thing that you put in a job description, while it may be true, it's probably not going to be true for long. And my job as a leader was to be able to leverage people's strengths. And so what you would find is, through the course of working with someone, was they might have a strength in an entirely different area, or there may be a key that's necessary in order to unlock a strength that there's no way it at the time of writing the job description. There's no way you could put it into the buzzword filter that they all use now. It just wouldn't work. Let me give you, for instance. So while I was at Bank of America, I had someone working for me. I inherited them. I was brought onto the team. And the first conversation I had about this person was that the person who had brought me onto the team was at their wits' end with them. They were going to let them go. They wanted to give me a shot at working with him to see if the performance wouldn't improve. And so I did. I struggled mightily in working with him. I couldn't understand where his source of frustration was coming from. Sure, there was a lot of things we were trying to do. There was a lot of changes we were making, new leadership in place, frustrating experience. But time and again, we were running into issues, and I would get complaints from people who were working with him that it wasn't pleasant working with him. So finally, and after having numerous conversations about, hey, we need to figure out if this is the fit for you. If you want to do this, I'll support you. If you need to find something else. After having many of those uncomfortable conversations, I was about to go out on family leave. And so I told him, I said, well, look, I've got this one project. I need you to run it. I need you to run it. If when I come back from family leave, I get a bunch of negative comments about the project and about how you've run it, then we're going to have a conversation. But I've got to get out on leave. You need to decide what you want to do. Well, when I returned from leave, I was shocked to hear from people that the project went very well, that he was a joy to work with. They felt like the situation had totally turned around. And I just had to kind of noodle on it and have a further discussion with him. But what became clear was that he needed ownership. What was giving him frustration was that he felt there wasn't a clear assignment of roles, not from his former manager, not from me. We didn't color it in. We didn't make it clear enough to say, look, you are on point. You are responsible for this. And in the culture of the bank, that was kind of common that we would leave things rather nebulous. It's I think a holdover from the bank being founded in Charlotte, North Carolina, very polite and collegial sort of culture. But that's not what he needed. He needed clear direction. He needed to know he was in charge of it. It frustrated him because he could see things not being done. He wasn't sure if it was his responsibility to do them or not. And so he wound up in a situation where either he felt like people weren't pulling their weight on the team and that he might get blamed for it because the roles weren't clear, or that they should know if he was responsible for it, and then that way he could get the support he needed from the rest of the team. And so just accidentally, when I left on family leave and I told him, this is your project, you run it, that was the clarity he needed. And I had no earthly idea that that was the key. None. But his performance improved tremendously. And what was interesting was the perception of him as a professional changed completely. People were thinking, well, maybe he doesn't have the aptitude for this or that. That went totally out the window. It was simply a matter of clear roles and responsibilities, project management one-on-one, if you will, was sufficient so that he could get his job done and do it well. The reason I bring that up is because that need is not something that typically gets articulated in a job description or an interview. You have to work with somebody to understand it. And part of the leader's job, in that case, it was pure dumb luck. But part of your job as a leader is to figure out those keys to people and unlock their performance so that they can be successful, the team can be successful, the company can be successful. And if there's just no way of doing that, then you have to change the team. But we have in place today a recruiting and hiring pipeline which does not recognize that reality. We have an interview process that does not recognize that reality. I will give you another, for instance. When I was hiring industrial engineers at a company I worked for, a colleague and I decided that we were going to change this process because it just wasn't working. We weren't getting good candidates through the pipeline. So we We had revised the job description. We tried to make it the best job description we possibly could. Still weren't getting the right candidates through because, HR has to recruit a whole bunch of different roles, and these were not core to our business. This was a function which was different than the core competency of the business. And so they didn't have a lot of experience with it. They didn't know what made a good industrial engineer. It was a new team, and they didn't have that experience. And try as we might to kind of translate it, we're looking for some specific things. We're trying to capture what a good industrial engineer is by those specific skills and competencies. And HR doesn't have experience with it. And moreover, unless you hit the buzzword right on the nose, they didn't know that a background was similar. So I could obviously scan through a bunch of resumes and say, oh, they've got something that's relevant experience. Yeah, it may not be the same thing. It may be in a different industry, but you know something? I bet you they know how to do this. And so as a result, I would tend to be more welcome to taking people on who didn't have 100% of the buzzwords. But again, I was looking to hire someone who had the right attitude and the right interest, not necessarily someone who had been an industrial engineer all their lives. There are downsides to that too. And in this role in particular, we need a little more flexibility. So a colleague and I decided that, hey, for this, round of interviews, we pull these people in, we're going to do something different. We're going to do it down at the distribution center. This was a company that was in the supply chain space. We're going to go down to the DC. We're going to interview them there. We're going to walk around the floor with them, and we're going to see, so much of the industrial engineering job is figuring out where the problems are. And so we said, we're going to walk around with them. We're not going to give them too much of an intro. And we're just going to ask them to observe the operation as we walk around. And we're going to see how they handle it. And then once we get back in the conference room, we're going to ask them, what's the biggest problem in this distribution center? And see how they deal with that answer. And I'll tell you, that was the most useful part of the whole process, because we had some people who came in and they said, well, I'd have to talk to a lot of people and I'd have to take a lot of data and et cetera, et cetera. Now that may be the textbook safe answer, but that's not what we needed because we didn't have large amounts of time. This wasn't a large team. It wasn't well established in the company. We needed to move quick. We needed to cover a lot of ground. And so we needed people who could see a problem, call it for what it was, and then navigate it. So we had one candidate, younger engineer, but he hit it right on the head. Now he was also diplomatic about it, but he clearly understood where the issue lay. And so that was the person we hired. He turned out to be a great hire. As a matter of fact, he wasn't really in an industrial engineering role for all that long. But he'd done such a great job in some of the engagements that he had. Well, people wanted the guy to work for him and solve the problems they had. So it was just a lesson to me and my colleague, my partner in crime on that engagement, that look, there are better ways to sift through candidates to find that real diamond than the ways we're doing it now. Fast forward a few years, and I was talking to a recruiter at a major telecom company. And she was very transparent, very forthright. Not all recruiters are. And she pointed out that the pipeline was completely broken. This was probably 3 or 4 years ago. And she said, you're better off playing the lottery than submitting a resume through that pipeline because it's just utterly broken. And the reason is they use those buzzword filters to do the work for them because they got so many applicants and, they're only one person to have to sort through all these things. They can't read everybody's full resume. But that buzzword filter system leads to people gaming it. They put in the buzzwords. They put it all over the place. That's what you're told to do. Because otherwise you'll get excluded. You won't even get to talk to anybody. And especially as you go deeper into your career, we have lots of experience in lots of different areas. Even if you were a lifer in one area, chances are by the time you get into your 40s and 50s, you've probably worked for a couple of companies. You may have jumped industries. Certainly, your discipline has evolved over that time. And so you're going to, have a lot of different experience. And so they tell you, tailor your resume for each opportunity. Go look up the job description, pull those keywords out, put those words somewhere in your resume. That's kind of stupid and a great waste of time. But the idea is to get through the initial screen. So at least you get to a phone call and can talk to somebody on the phone. But it's also an invitation to dishonesty. And there are people who are trying to find work. And so they'll gloss it. They'll claim experience they don't have, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It also comes down to the fact that very often the hiring manager doesn't know what they want for that role. They flat out don't. In some cases, sometimes they're hiring for roles where because they don't know, they just want somebody to take it on. And so you're asking somebody who's not very familiar with that to set the filters for the buzzword generator, and then you're going to get in a bunch of people that may have gotten through the buzzword generator, but when you get right down to it, they can't perform that role. Culture is a much better indicator of that, because the culture is how the company actually works. And so even if you come in and it's less than optimal for a while in performing that given role, if you fit in well with the culture and the company, you're going to find success because you'll be able to work well with other people. You'll be able to cover your weaknesses and be able to contribute your strengths. And if it turns out that role was not the greatest fit for you, chances are there's going to be another one. And because you're already a known quantity in the company and work well with people, they can just move you over there. But that's not how the process is set up. You don't get to assess culture fit in this process until you get a face-to-face interview. The phone screen is mainly just weeding out, if you have a grossly inappropriate demeanor for that company, then they might catch it at the phone screen. But what are you talking about on the phone screen? It's your background. You're capturing the misses from the buzzword screening process to decode the rest of your resume. And then when you come in for the face-to-face interview, some part of that is the same thing. You're having the same discussion again with people one-on-one now, but at least they have an opportunity to interact with you and get a little bit better feel for what it would be like to work with you. So why is it, and I've asked this question to many people down the years, just about every hiring manager agrees that if they have to choose between someone who has the exact experience they want, but is difficult to work with, or somebody who lacks some of the experience they need, but is great to work with, they take the great to work with person every time. I think it's human nature. And usually the response you get back is, look, we can train skills. But can we really train attitude? Can we really train that commitment to values? If someone doesn't have integrity, the topic of a past podcast here, if someone doesn't have that integrity, can you really teach it to them on the job? Or is it in their DNA? And yet we set up the whole process backwards. We're filtering out people who would be great culture fits because they're missing one or more buzzwords. And usually that proportion is very arbitrary. I know as a hiring manager, no one ever asked me, hey, what could you live without? Give me the absolutely essential stuff and then point to me the stuff that you're willing to give on. We never had that conversation. It was either in there or not. And then they set the filter and away it went. So what I would like to say to the hiring managers and the recruiters out there, let's stop the madness with this resume filtering stuff and figure out what is it that we need in terms of culture fit. Look at the values of your company. translate those values into behaviors, filter that for the role, so that you're making it more specific. Okay, we say someone needs to have integrity. What does that mean for this role? Put that down, right? And then lead with that. Tailor your resume discussion so that you're having conversations about those values. It can be done in the form of a simple questionnaire. Give me a time when this happened. If you want to use integrity as an example, put a simple case study out. Ask them to make a decision and justify it on a hypothetical. Anything to help you sift for people who may be the perfect culture fit, even if they don't happen to have what all the buzzwords that are in that job description. And let's face it, people take jobs to get experience. So very few people are content to take a job which is the exact same mirror of what they've done in the past. They need something different in order to learn and grow. And so we should be welcoming people who maybe have they got some of the experience we need. This particular role, I took on a role, for example, in supplier quality. I happen to have experience in both quality and in sourcing. But my sourcing experience wasn't the same as somebody who had been a buyer all their life either. I had some sourcing experience and I had a bunch of quality experience. And they said, well, oddly enough, this job is mainly quality, but it's got some sourcing. So that wound up being a perfect fit. It was a good intersection for me. You have folks like that out there. I took the supplier quality job because I wanted to strengthen my interaction with sourcing folks. I knew the quality side of it, but I really wanted to work more with the buyers, and that job gave me the opportunity to do that. Remember that your candidates are looking for something out of that job besides just a paycheck. And so you need to leave some room in there. But let's flip the process on its head. Look for the culture fit first, and then within folks who are a great fit for your company, you can look for the job description. It's the same thing as the NFL when they go out on draft day, and some folks get drafted for a different position than they played in. Certainly by the time game time comes around, you'll see folks who may have played quarterback, for example, suddenly learning how to catch the ball, playing wide receiver, because that's a better fit for their, God-given talents in that particular team at that particular time. And so if they want to contribute, that's what they do. Why don't we give that a shot and see if we don't start getting a better recruiting pipeline as a result? Because remember, job performance and experience are important, but culture is everything. Have a great day.